Writing from the soul is the mother of all invention, and 21 Grams is back for another season of this exploration. We will look into the artist and the art they create. Except, this season we're adding the questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot, to go even deeper. They say 21 grams is the weight of the soul, and this show is the scale. So now here's your host for 21 grams, Joe Compton. Hello everybody, welcome to 21 grams, and yes, to my left, or to my right, your left probably on the screen, Mr. Wayne Turmel is here. Hello Wayne, how you doing?
I'm good, brother. How are you?
Good. I always like to start off by giving everybody an opportunity to kind of give everybody an insight to who you are. So tell the people out there a little bit about yourself.
What is my 21 grams? I am a 62-year-old cishet white guy born in Canada, live here now. I live in Las Vegas. I have been a stand-up comic, a car salesman, a business consultant. I've written 16 books, 10 of which are nonfiction and businessy and all grown up, and then my 6 novels. And now I'm muddling in other things. I'm a pretty decent guy once you get to know me. I think that's probably enough to get us started. Though I suspect they will know and or care more or less by the time we're done. But
yeah, it's funny because and Anita's here and Tiffany's here. Hello, everybody, and there you are breaking the fourth wall for us. It's funny because when I searched for you the first time, I remember this pretty vividly. Because you signed up for my show and I didn't know who you are, so I always like to do some research on people, and I always do research for this show too. But yeah, it was kind of like I knew you'd written like a fiction book, but then I saw all this nonfiction. I go, this can't be the same guy. And yet here it is. It's the same guy, and it's very interesting. So I'm kind of curious, why was fiction always something that you loved to do? You just didn't give it a try, or was it something that you kind of fell into?
Fiction was always my first love.
Of landscape for you.
Fiction was always my first love. I think a lot of nerdy kids, and I was a nerdy kid in a tiny sawmill town in Canada. But I think like all nerdy kids, you fall in love with books if that's what you do. And we get lied to, right? Authors are famous and they have big houses and they go on these world book tours and you write stuff and get checks in the mail. And so they lied to us. And I didn't pursue it. I went to school for 2 years. I went to college for 2 years under the get my parents off my back plan. And during that time, actually just before I started college, I started doing stand-up. And so that's where my creative juices went for the better part of 17 or 18 years. And, that brought me from Vancouver to Toronto and then Toronto to LA. And when the wife and child insisted on eating, and it was clear that I wasn't going to make it as either a stand-up or as a writer, because I had screenplays optioned, but nothing ever happened. I could never find decent management. I had to be a big boy and man up and, run away from the circus. And it took me a while to find my feet and find an industry that I could do well in. But once I did, there was still a chance to write, but it was now nonfiction. And it was, I'm in the training business. So even though I'm not trained as a teacher, that's what I do. I'm a teacher. I try to help people learn stuff. Right. And that was fine for a while. And then, my little ADD brain starts to get a little crazy. And I remember then this was after my 7th, 8th book. I remember having a conversation with my daughter and she's like, oh, I'm 22 and I just dropped out of school and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life and it's over. And I'm like, kid, And so I went, what is it that I want to do? And the one thing, even after having written my entire life, I was never going to be a real writer until I tackled a novel. And I didn't know if I could do it. Everything I had written was short and, different formats and whatever, but I was obsessed with this story that I couldn't let go. And I said, okay, let me see if I can do this. And it did two things. One is I could do it. It's pretty good for a first novel. And the other thing is that it introduced me to the community of writers. I was in suburban Chicago. I joined the Naperville Writers Group, and every Wednesday night we'd meet in this room and read and critique each other, and then we'd go to Lou Malnati's for pizza and have the meeting after the meeting, which was really the valuable part.
Yeah, right.
Right. And that's because I am essentially antisocial. Hanging with writers became my social interaction. I always worked from home for the last 15 years, more than that. So, it wasn't like I was going to the office every day and interacting. But once I started hanging with writers, and it becomes inspiring and competitive in the best way. And, this person's doing that. I got to see if I can try this. And so that's it. So now I'm a reasonably happy curmudgeon, if that's not too much of an oxymoron.
No, I think there's something to be said for that, obviously. But yeah, I mean, so was Johnny Lycan that character that we're talking about?
Well, that's not the character that inspired me.
Yeah.
Johnny Lycan came later. My first 3 novels were historical fiction. The first novel I wrote was something called The Count of the Sahara, which is the true life story. It's mostly the true life story of a guy named Byron de Prorock, who wanted to be a star so badly. He was an archaeologist, and he's the only archaeologist from the 20s with an IMDb page, because before he went into archaeology, he actually tried being an actor.
How cool.
And he BS'd his way from being a fairly competent scientist on a dig to being the leader of an expedition that was all over the New York Times. And he was the most famous archaeologist in the world for like 6 months. And then they found out that he's, a pathological liar and a drunk and a fraud and all kinds of things. And so the book was kind of his rise and fall. And it was pretty ambitious. It bounced back and forth between his expedition, what actually happened on the expedition, and then this barnstorming tour where his life falls apart because he basically gets found out. And that was my first book, and it got very nicely received, and I got spoiled. I found a publisher for it almost right away. It was a small indie press, but right?
Still. Yeah.
So I thought, how hard can this be? So then I wrote Acra's Bastard, which was the tale, which it's basically Kipling's Kim set in the Crusades. It's about a young orphan gets kicked out of his orphanage, gets turned into a spy, and book 1 became book 2. So there's Acra's Bastard and Acra's Orphans. But I did those books on my own, self-published, and realized that I'm an idiot and can't be trusted. Good writing is a collaborative process at the end to get it out in the world, and I can't be trusted. I can't trust a proof myself. I have no taste in covers. Just as an example, I can't advertise Acra's Bastard on Amazon, because even though the title is a historically accurate thing, it has a bad word in it, according to the algorithms that run Amazon, and I can't run ads for my own book. So I decided I could have made Luca a trilogy. I probably should have, but I said, you know what? No, I'm stopping after the second book in the series because nobody's buying it anyway. And I had this idea for what I knew was going to be a series, but it was urban fantasy. It was a totally different genre. It was a totally different style of writing, um, and an inordinate amount of fun. And so, uh, you know, Johnny Lycan in the Anubis Disc came out, and then last year, Johnny Lycan in the Vegas Berserker, and in May, the third book, Johnny Lycan and the Last Witchfinder, comes out in the world, and then we'll see what comes next after that.
Yeah, Bob's here saying hello. Hello, Bob.
Hey,
Uh,
Bob, how are you, man?
yeah, I was actually looking up the book while you were talking, and for everybody out there, here's the cover of Count of Sahara. This is yeah, there you go. So nice book.
It is a real book. It's a very, but here's my thing about collaboration. That is not the title that it went to the publisher with.
Sure.
That is nothing like the cover
Yeah.
that I expected it to have. And I was completely wrong. You know, I am not, despite my huge ego, and Lord knows it, I possess it. I'm smart enough to know that there are people, you know, if your job is selling books, I'm going to assume that you're going to do everything in your power and know how to do that.
Sure.
And so why would my ego say, no, I'm going to take my crappy title and walk? Right? It just makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it's what I feel like a lot of times with authors, that they have this misguided sense of how their book would be translated into a TV show or a movie. And often they don't realize how many hands it touches and how many things have to go
Well,
the way it has to go in order to make something like that happen.
it's
And
funny that you mentioned that. Um, when my when the third Johnny Lycan went off to the publisher, I said, okay, smart guy, what do you do now? Well, from my stand-up days, I had connections with an old friend of mine that I've known since my stand-up days, who's now a producer, does stuff for Netflix. And he had read the book and said the book's really good. And I said, well, if I wrote a screenplay, would you take a look at it? Cut to, he read it, he's interested. It sort of vaguely. He's got to take it to his producing partners, and who the heck knows.
right.
But he's interested, and he started saying, well, we might want to change this, we might want to change that. I'm like, yeah. I mean, already I had to change big pieces of it because I know it's going to have no budget. So the
Hmm.
big set pieces have to be scaled down, and this and that. And there's a character that I really like that I know is not going to make the cut
Mm.
for flow reasons. And he says, you're really reasonable about this. And I said, Dave, you've known me for almost 40 years. I am a hoe. My job is to get this made. I would like to sell it. I would like to make money on it. And I
Yeah.
want to get it made. And I'm not going to do that with my giant auteur vision of what this looks like.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody gets a piece of it. The actors are going to have something to say about it. The director is going to have say something. The production people are going to say, no, we have to set it here. And unless it's just totally like going to be an embarrassment, that's how the business works.
Yeah. Yeah. And super famous people like Stephen King learned that firsthand when they tried to do it themselves and realized what a daunting and monumental task it is to make something like that happen. So,
Well, and the
you
more
know,
complicated it is, you know, Wagner used to talk about opera. The reason Wagner was so fascinated with opera is because it was everything, right? It was music,
yeah,
it was dance, it was acting, it was singing, it was all these things, right? And when you think about a film, even a crappy straight to video monster movie, think of the number of brains that are involved in bringing that to life. You know, you can't just bulldoze your way through it, or you're Edward Wood.
okay. So that being said, I'm curious about the evolution of Johnny.
Yeah.
When did you first get the inkling for him, and what sparked it for you that that you were able to kind of go on this journey with
This
him?
sounds like such a nonsense artsy thing, but it's true. I guess you call it lucid dreaming. Like, I very often, before I wake up in the morning, I'm not really awake, but I know I'm not really asleep. And I still have these very vibrant kind of dreams. And years ago, so I'm going to give you the story here because we have time. Years ago, in my 20s, Robert McCammon was a really hot horror writer. And he wrote a book called The Wolf's Hour, which I loved.
Great
And
book.
it's
Yeah,
so dumb. It's
great
so
book.
dumb. But here, okay, so here's the thing, right? If you're explaining The Wolf's Hour to somebody, he's a secret agent. Cool. He's a Russian secret agent fighting Nazis.
Yeah.
Excellent. He's a Russian secret agent fighting Nazis, and he's a werewolf. Sign me up for that.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you not love that? So years later, I literally had this dream where this werewolf is a detective fighting Russian gangsters. I have no idea where it came from. I had no idea of what to do with it, what the concept was, but it made me laugh. And when I finished Acra's Orphans, I was like, okay, smart guy, what do you do now? And I just had this idea and I started thinking, and I knew that I wanted to write something that had a potential to make some money. Right. So I knew
Mm,
series were hot. Urban fantasy was the hot genre. I could write in modern voice, so I didn't have to, I could do real jokes and I could have characters that were relatable and stuff. This would
yeah.
be fun to write. And I set it up. I did the whole backstory. How did Johnny come to be? Who is he? What's his deal? Whatever.
Yeah.
And then I just had so much fun. The secondary characters in this series are so much fun. And then it was like, okay, here's book one, and I know where book one ends. And book two, I'd started outlining just after I moved to Vegas. And I thought, oh, this is, send a werewolf to Vegas. What could possibly go wrong? And so Johnny comes to Vegas on a case, and there are some really cool characters, a couple of whom had appeared in short stories that I'd written, but I
Nice.
resurrected them. And then, okay, my ADD is so bad that 3 books is all I can do. If I have to write Johnny Lycan for the rest of my life, I'll lose my mind. So how do I wrap this bad boy up?
Yeah.
And that's what, yes, Bob, that's right. McCammon is an Alabama boy. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny because it's really cool that I'm doing back-to-back episodes, you and Bob, this tonight, because you guys have a lot of parallels, right? So there's
I think Johnny and oh God, I'm
Howard
Howard.
Howard
I think
Martin.
Johnny and Howard would eventually get along.
Yes.
They're
It'd be
very
cool to have
different.
it'd be cool to see you guys do like a Scooby Doo thing where you do like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
alphabet reading out.
It would be tense and unpleasant for a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's true. There are similarities, to be sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, writing in your own backyard, which is something we can talk about, but also the interesting thing that I think that you guys share that I think is very interesting to me because I could never figure this out, and this is kind of how I've always wanted to write a series too, is to write a character that you can write one-offs of, and singularly do storylines where they're parallel storylines to the character, the evolution of the character, but they're different stories every time you write them.
Yeah.
So basically, between the Annabis Discs and Vegas Berserker, there's things in there that are going to you need from both books, but the stories themselves wrap themselves up within that book, and you move forward, which is
Yeah,
very
I always liked, one of the things I don't like about modern television
interesting.
is that once you start a series, you got to stick with it.
Yeah,
Right. I used to love episodic series, right?
yeah,
The Rockford Files. Yeah, you got a little bit of a story that kind of went through, but you could watch it beginning to end and go, that was cool, that was fun, and not watch it for 6 weeks and come back and watch it and it was great.
Yeah.
right? The last show that I remember being like that is a silly show, which is one of my all-time favorites, called Burn Notice.
Yeah.
An old USA series
Hmm.
about Michael Weston used to be a spy. And each season had a through arc, but you could just pop in and whatever the adventure of the week
Yeah.
is, right? You could do that. And that's what I tried to do with Johnny. And I've left it open ended. I could go back. But certainly the first two books can be read as standalones.
Yep.
And third book, there's a little history there, but it could still be read. The people that have read it and started to give me stuff on it, feedback and reviews and stuff, a lot of them hadn't read the first two books and they had no trouble
Hmm.
following the story.
You
And
know,
I
it,
think
it
that's a bit
reminds
of a lost art.
yeah, it reminds me a lot of The Mentalist, actually, where
Yeah,
you have this overarching thing that's conflicting this character, but
right. He's got his trauma and his backstory.
but each week he's solving a different crime, basically, and that's basically,
Yeah,
it's the thing that, and you learn a little bit more about him every time he
yeah.
does that.
You
So,
see that right now. There's a series called The Irrational
uh-huh.
with Jesse L. Martin,
Hmm.
which I'm obsessed with the show because it's all about the psychology of the human mind and
Hmm.
biases and blind spots. It's not great television, but it's an interesting series. And they
Yeah.
do that. Like the first 2 minutes and last 2 minutes of every episode is his tragic backstory as it gets discovered. And then he just goes and solves the mystery of the week.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm good with that.
Yeah. And that's very similar to The Mentalist. I really feel like there is some really good episodes of The Mentalist, and there's some really bad ones too. So
Yeah.
I really feel like that's the double edged sword with this, right? And I think is that kind of your thinking behind why 3 books is good enough? Because if you go further than that, you may be jumping the shark a little bit.
Well, if anybody is not entirely tired of me by the time we've done this, you can go back to the last episode of the Green Room uh,
Yeah,
conversation that I did with David Green and then the conversation with Nikki. And I'm kind of seriesed out.
yeah,
Like, I start a book and it's like, oh, great, this is book one of 7, and
yeah,
everybody, wants to be Brandon Sanderson. And it's like, oh, kill me. I don't want to work that hard. Give me a story and I know why they do it, right?
yeah,
Creatively, we aspire to that. And frankly, selling one-off books is nearly impossible.
yeah,
Unless you have a huge back catalog, it is almost impossible to sell a
yeah,
standalone book. And so I get it. And that being said, I've got kind of literary ADD, and it's like I've got ideas to spin off. Like I say, there are a couple of characters that have come out of the book that
hmm.
may find a life of their own. Um,
I was
but
going to ask you.
How many Johnny Lycan stories am I going to tell?
Right, right. I was gonna ask you though, because like you have guys like Bobby Nash who do stories within stories sometimes, and
Yeah.
he has his trilogies, and it was a character based off a character that appeared in a different book, a kind of idea, but which is similar to what you're talking about now. But do you feel like Johnny Lycan could make some cameos and some things
Oh,
that you
sure.
write down the road?
Sure. Absolutely. The third book, there's a character that again came to me in one of these weird things, and it had nothing to do with Johnny. It was a totally
Mm,
different thing. And I came up with this character and went, that is so freaking cool. And so I've introduced him into the third book. He's a big piece of The Last Witchfinder, but he is the perfect place to jump off another series if I wanted. And
yeah,
if I did the series with Casper and his little misfit band, Johnny could very easily do drop-ins.
nice. It's kind of cool to have a character like that too, right? Do you feel like that's kind of a neat thing to have that character for you?
I do. I'm really, really happy with Johnny.
Yeah.
Um, I think as a character, he's sufficiently. I mean, given, let's not kid ourselves. It's a, if Jack Reacher was a werewolf, he'd be Johnny Lycan. It's a pretty
Yeah.
simple concept. But I like Johnny. I like
He's got a,
werewolves I
and
like
he's got a little
werewolves.
bit more juxtaposition than Jack Reacher does too. He gets a little bit into a little bit of a pickle sometimes.
Yeah. He well, he admits he's not the brightest bulb on the tree.
Yeah,
He's smarter than he thinks he is.
yeah. Which
And
is
he's
another parallel
essentially,
to Howard.
besides having this giant rage monster inside of himself,
Yeah,
he's essentially trying to be a good guy. He's
yeah,
trying to adult, right?
yeah.
When he starts, he doesn't believe in the occult. He thinks he's the weirdest thing that's out there. And he finds out that he's not, which messes with him, right?
Yeah.
I remember there's a scene in the third book. He says, I don't believe in demons because if I believe in demons, I have to believe they have a boss. And if there's a devil, then there's a God. And I have no room in my world philosophy for that.
It's funny. That's great. Okay, so the raging debate, right? In a community of supernaturals is Lycan versus werewolf
Yeah.
ideology. I'm curious where you fall on that, having the character actually be named Lycan.
Yeah. Well,
But you do describe him as a werewolf often
you know, it's like I'm a magical being that sucks blood, but don't call me a vampire.
right.
I remember there's a scene in one of the books where it says, do you call yourself a werewolf? He says, actually, identify as like an American.
Yeah.
Um,
A very, very
here's
cool
the way
line.
I look at it. And the Underworld series kind of gave me this.
Mm,
Werewolf in our kind of pop culture thing has a very specific meaning,
mm,
right?
yeah.
The full moon, oh crap, I forgot the moon was coming. Oh, and silver bullets and all that
Yeah.
stuff. Lycan is a general category of wolf-like shapeshifter.
Hmm.
And by not specifically calling him a werewolf very often, I can play with the mythology a bit.
Hmm.
For example, Johnny was born this way. He was born in Romania during the AIDS crisis. He comes from an area that he was adopted and brought to the States, but he's always had this in him,
Hmm.
right? As opposed to he got bit. In the first book, he bites somebody and turns him. So there are kind of two types of these things. It can be naturally ingrained, or you can get it by transmission.
Mm.
And so you start playing the what if game as a writer. Okay, if he's always had this thing in him, what was his childhood like? Well, clearly he was hyperactive. Clearly he had anger issues, probably developed as he got older, right? Coming
Yeah.
into fruition, like so many mental illnesses coming into fruition as a late teen. And the big thing for me was, and one of the screenplays I had optioned years ago had this same concept. The idea that, 27 days of the month, I'm a perfectly fine, functional human being. All hell breaks loose never made any sense. So what I did was, okay, he's always got it inside him. The closer he is to the full moon, the harder it is to control. As you get to the bottom of the cycle, he feels like crap. He's tired. He has no energy. But then it starts to build again. And it's like
Yeah.
lather, rinse, repeat every month. And that was a piece of world building that I could work with.
That's awesome.
The
other interesting thing for me about these books that I find a little bit fascinating is how it toes the line of the genre a little bit. But what I mean by that is that it's very much set in an urban fantasy setting. There is some graphic nature to it a little bit, but there is also this kind of, and I think it's because the humor cuts through it, but there is this kind of cozy mystery feel to a lot of the moments in these books that I'm currently reading. One of the Lycan books, and it feels like this could have been a cozy mystery at some point, but there's something that takes it out of that
Yeah.
because that genre has very strict rules and things of that
Yes.
nature, but there is that kind of playfulness to it. And do you
That's
do
a
you,
fun observation. Um, I always had a problem with the cozy mystery thing, besides the fact that, my brain doesn't work nice and sweet. I don't work that way.
you're
But
right.
also the whole thing, like, okay, there's no swearing and there's no this and there's no that. But it always starts with a murder. Like, why was
Yeah.
Jessica Fletcher never arrested? Cabot Cove had the highest body count per capita of any city in America.
Yeah.
Right? How is that sweet and real? I'd be hiding inside my house every day if I lived in that crappy little town.
there
Um,
there is
but
one
I think
episode.
what gives you that, I think what gives it that cozy impression
Yeah.
is two things. One is that it's written in first person.
Yeah.
And so you're inside Johnny's head and you can see him trying so hard to be a good guy.
Yeah.
But the other thing is the secondary characters that he works with, I think, create a sense of community,
There is that. Yeah.
which gives it a very homey kind of feeling. Because at the end of the day, Johnny is a good guy with a horrible problem who's trying to make it.
I think also the humor that cuts through it is very apparent, and that helps it. That helps kind of lighten it a little bit too. But also, you can see your influence as a stand-up in the way you write because of the
Yeah.
cadencing and how you set up a joke and pay it off, and that's kind of an interesting aspect of it too. Do you find that you're flexing your stand-up muscle when you're writing more than you might have thought you would have?
Well, certainly with this series.
Yeah.
Count of the Sahara is set in the 20s. There is
Yeah.
a certain style of humor. There's certain
Right.
things you can reference. There are ways people behaved and talked
Sure.
to each other. And there's
Mm.
humor in that book. Just as, I mean, in the Acra's Bastard and Acra's Orphans books, Luca has to flee the orphanage because he's molested by one of the knights, and
Mhm.
he's out on the street, and it's horrible. And there's still humor in that can be found in those
Mm.
situations. I think it's how people survive. It's how I survive.
Mhm.
Not everybody does, but that's always been my survival mechanism. When I'm the little hyperactive redheaded kid who's getting stuffed in lockers for being annoying,
Mm.
and I was both stuffed in lockers and very annoying. That was my defense mechanism. The adults wouldn't hate me if I could make them laugh.
Yeah.
And that absolutely comes through. It also doesn't hurt that all of my novels, actually, were written in first person.
Yeah. That helps, yeah, for sure.
And so, there's going to be a lot of me. If I see the humor in something, odds are that character's going to see the humor in it.
Yeah. It's funny too because writing a joke, I don't know what kind of stand-up you were because obviously I've never seen you do stand-up, but I get a sense that you had some storytelling aspects to your stand-up, and because you're the kind of guy that likes it seems like pay it forward and pay it off. So that would strike me as it would be surprising to me that you would be like an Anthony Jeselnik where you had like one-liners. It would be surprising to me if that was
Yeah,
your
it was
stand-up.
more one-liners than storytelling, but there was always some of that.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think the thing about it, and this is why it's so weird, because it's a very different thing to write a joke that you're going to tell in front of an audience, or even here, some of this is material I've done before, and some of it is just spilling out of my head, let's face it. But when you write a book, somebody explained it. This is perfect. He said, writing a book is like writing a joke and then waiting a year for the laugh.
Yeah. Nice. I love that.
It's like, where's the payoff?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's very different. Yeah, and it's funny because if somebody said to me, "You absolutely must write a book that is a full-on comedy," I would quit tomorrow.
Yeah.
I don't think I could do it. because humor, to me, the best humor comes out of situations.
Yeah. And
And
that's again,
and it also sets you up for failure. The
yeah.
minute you say, and you've experienced this in your life,
Yeah.
"Man, I got to tell you the funniest story," and you tell the story and you tell it great, and the other person just doesn't think it's funny,
Yeah.
right? That's stressful because nothing is as personal to somebody as their sense of
Their
humor.
story. Yeah.
And what makes you laugh might not make somebody else laugh, might not make somebody else laugh. I always said
Yeah.
if you really want to know somebody, look at what they think is really funny and what porn they look at. That'll tell you everything you need to know about that person, or
Who
so
knew
I've
it was
heard.
all in the browser history? Okay, so you're essentially all done with the Johnny Lycan journey for the most part.
For the moment, yeah. Although, as I was telling you before we got together on air here,
Yeah.
I took a kick at a screenplay.
Yeah.
Let's let's see if Johnny Lycan the movie gets made. I don't know.
I'm curious though. Like I said, and you're probably spinning off some characters from the series. You're also probably going to have Johnny appear in other things. But do you feel like Johnny, you've had a moment to say goodbye to Johnny, or do you feel like Johnny will always be with you, and you're kind of right with the same sense that Johnny's like right there with you the whole time?
Oh man,
It's always the fascinating thing to me about when you finish a series, right?
yeah, isn't that funny? I haven't gotten that emotional about it. But part of it is, because I'm not self-publishing, the
Yeah,
manuscript has been out of my hands for months now.
yeah, yeah,
Right. Matter of fact, I just got the cover art,
yeah,
draft one of the cover art the other day.
yeah,
So I've kind of done for the moment
yeah.
with him.
You've had time to
I
process.
Yeah, I've had time to process it, and like I say, if I pick up from the third series, there is definitely at least one other story that must be told
Mhm.
that is Johnny centric, and then there's this new cast of characters from the third book that is basically a license to go crazy and tell as many stories as I want to tell.
Nice.
Um,
I,
I create unintentionally. I created the Johnny verse.
yeah, yeah,
And it was unintentional when I first did it. I always intended to do the books, but when I wrote the first book, I needed a MacGuffin,
yeah.
right? What is this thing that Johnny's going to look for? Well, I
Right.
had written a short story that got published in the UK called The Forger of Cairo, which was the Anubis disc. This was essentially the thing. And I
Hmm.
went, oh, that's cool. It's a blood sucking ancient relic. How do you not love that? Right. And it works with Johnny and stuff. And then I had written another story a few years back about a psychic pawnbroker in Las Vegas. And so when I think, oh, Johnny's going to go to Vegas, well, he's got to meet Lamb,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so there were all these bits and pieces of things that were never intended to go together, but damn if they don't all fit.
Peanut butter and chocolate.
That's it, man. You got your short story character in my novel.
Yeah. So that being said, moving on from Johnny, and then let's
Yeah.
say you get all this universe stuff out of you. Do you feel like there's something you want to try that you haven't attempted that you're out there looking at right now?
Yeah. Yeah. I actually, over the summer, as I knew Johnny was coming to an end,
Hmm.
uh, and I'm having a bit of an existential crisis. I
Right.
realized that I'm going to be having the day job for a very long time. My dream is that I retire and I can make enough between the books and what pittance of Social Security is coming to me that I can sit on my back deck with the hummingbirds and just write. Right, that's the dream. And I could retire tomorrow if I die Thursday. the thing is that I started making a list. What are the ideas, the stories, the things that I want to tell? And some of them are moments from history, maybe go back to that. Some of them are ideas that I've had, very serious story ideas that go back to my life in Canada. Um, I've always wanted to. My grandmother was murdered when I was 7, and I've
Oh
always
wow.
wanted to do something about that. Right.
Wow.
And so I created a list. I got a list, man. I got. I can't die yet. I got stuff to do.
I got stuff to do.
But where I'm going to go with it or what directions go, I don't know yet.
Mhm. Are you
Right
gonna
now, I'm playing
stay?
with screenplays. I've
Yeah, I
got
was
the
just gonna
Johnny
say.
screenplay. I've got the Johnny screenplay, and I've also got a low budget horror film that I really like. I think
Oh, nice.
has potential to get made because it's low budget.
Hmm.
It's like, you know, it follows in a women's prison. How do you not sell that? I ask you.
Sounds like it sells itself, to be honest. But
You would think.
but yeah, I was
Um,
just gonna ask you: is that the intention? Is to stay within prose and do narrative, or are you looking at branching off into the film world a little bit more?
the characters from the third Johnny book, I think would make a great series,
Mm,
uh, a la Kolchak the Night Stalker
mm,
kind
yeah,
of thing. I think that would be fun to do. I don't know if I'm writer enough to tackle a series,
yeah. It's a lot of
and
work.
go through all the trouble of selling it, and
Yeah,
all the Sturmendrang. I'm not a
yeah,
young man, but it would be fun. I
yeah.
do want to go back to some historical fiction, to be sure. I cannot write poetry, so that's not an issue.
Yeah.
And there's some more personal stuff, and I don't know. Truthfully, I don't know that I'm writer enough to tackle some of the things I want to tackle. They're pretty ambitious artistically.
Hmm. But if you don't try, it's gonna eat you alive, right? So
Well, that's the theory. That's what's gotten me this far. So,
yeah, right.
if where I am is a good place, I guess that's the right answer. Or, that's why I'm in this trouble. Right.
Yeah. Do you find that, right? I mean, fundamentally, writing a screenplay and writing prose is much much different, right?
Oh, they're totally different. And screenplays are so much easier. Oh my gosh. I did. It was funny. I took Johnny, little insight for those of you wanting to play in this particular sandbox. And by the way, nobody's talking to us, and that's very depressing. Um,
It happens.
I
Everybody's just enthralled by the conversation.
I pulled out my note. Yes, because I'm so riveting. I pulled out my note cards and I started doing scenes for the movie, the Johnny Lycan movie, and what get
Mhm.
play. And then I got a trial copy of Final Draft. Now, my first screenplay in 1980 was written on a manual typewriter fueled by mezcal and
God.
grapefruit juice.
Oh, ouch.
And just trying to think of all the hassle of formatting it, it's easy. And you don't have to do any description. It's like listening to an autistic person tell a story. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens.
Mhm.
You don't have to describe it. You don't have to be particularly witty, except in the dialogue. It's so much. First drafts are so easy
There's
in
magic.
screenplays.
Yeah. I I first off, I commend you for trying it on a manual typewriter. For me, the tabbing and the constant pushing for God,
Yeah.
I hated that. I wrote two or three of them on manual, and I was like, I lo- I think that when I was able to do it on a computer, that changed the game for me
Oh,
a
it
lot of ways. You know.
completely changed the game. I mean, oh my gosh. My first screenplay was written on a manual typewriter, and not just any manual typewriter. I mean, a big, giant, honking Remington, 30 pounds of death steel. uh, thing. And it was a nightmare to format. And then if you
Yeah.
make a mistake, you've got to
Yeah.
get the white out and
Oh
you got to
God.
do all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
These kids today, they don't know. They got it so easy. These kids with their rock and roll and their Elvis.
And then you had to hole punch the sides, put the
Then you
brackets
had to
in.
hole punch it. Then you had to make copies and manually send copies in the mail to the people that you were showing them off to.
Yeah.
I mean, how
There's
anything
no
got made.
PDF, there's no email.
No. How anything ever got made. I remember going to the Writers Museum in Chicago, and they have the original manuscript of On the Road by Jack Kerouac,
Oh my God.
which is one giant roll of handwritten newsprint.
It's fantastic.
Oh, dear Lord. It's like I do not complain
Yeah,
about
I
too
agree.
much these days when it comes to the technology. Hey,
You missed
Maddie.
all you missed all the Johnny Lycan talk. You have to go back and watch it, Maddie. It was we'll still talk some more, but yeah, that's too much work. If it makes y'all feel better, and never written anything on a typewriter, it does not make us feel better, Bob. But nice try. Yes, liquid paper to the rescue. That's depressing.
Yeah, well, see, now here's where people start to give you the age. This is
Yeah,
when you've reached a certain age when people start to tell you,
yeah,
oh, I wasn't alive then.
yeah, yeah. It's weird talking to people who weren't alive during 9/11. That freaks me out. But
My daughter is 30. And so it ruins a lot of things. First of all, I have to think about how is this person in reference to my daughter, right?
yeah,
Is she
yeah,
close to the same age? Which, first of all, ruins being a dirty old man. Because the age of women I can ogle without guilt
yeah.
has, you know,
I get
raised
that.
considerably.
Sure.
But the other thing is that I remember trying to explain to my daughter the concept of you got paid on Friday, and if you didn't get to the bank by the time the bank closed, your weekend was screwed.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Banks weren't open Saturday. There were no ATMs. You
yeah,
stood in line at the bank and waited to cash your check.
yeah, yeah.
And
It suck.
it's a totally different world. And that's actually one of the things about Johnny is Johnny's a 30-year-old guy in Chicago. I
Mm.
have to remember that he's the lunkheads my daughter dates, and he's not me. So one of the things that I like about my writers group is it's a very diverse group, and they will say, no, you sound like a 60-year-old man.
That's funny. uh, May says, "Oh, on that concept, I know you had until noon Saturday. Mobile deposit is legit."
Not in Canada. The banks weren't open Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah, yeah. I do think there is certainly something to be said for appreciation of the work you had to put in to get something done, uh, and what convenience really means to you now, right? I mean, being able to like literally be emailed changes or work on the same document at the same time. If you're working
Oh,
in like Google Word, the
yeah.
Google Doc, you can literally watch the changes as you're writing them, right? And that's
It's
kind of
it's amazing, and people who haven't gone through the before times don't know, right,
yeah,
what that is, and you can't hold that against them. At the
no,
same time, it's very I'm going to wax philosophic for a moment. It's like independent publishing, right? 20
yeah,
years ago, if you didn't go through a traditional publisher, you had to self-publish, which meant paying for the press, paying for the book,
yeah,
right? Vanity press.
yeah,
And on the one hand, it's like death to the big five. The workers have seized the means of production. You no longer have to go through some secretary in New York for your stuff to get out in the world. That's a beautiful thing. There are no barriers to entry. And now there are no barriers to entry,
yeah,
which means there's no quality control,
yeah,
right? which means that yes, there is some brilliant, wonderful stuff being done independently in music and film and in books. The people on here are all terrific writers, and I enjoy all their work. And there's a lot of stuff that should never see the light of day that is out
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
agree.
all technology enabled too.
Yep. Yeah. It's you take the good with the bad, right? And again, double-edged sword. It's kind of the theme tonight.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Wayne, that's the best reference for Johnny ever. All right, before we get to the questionnaire, Wayne, I did
Yeah.
have one question that I really am interested in knowing from you, and that is what now you've taken this journey with Johnny. What has Johnny given you that you never expected he would?
Wow. That's way deeper than I thought my little silly werewolf story was going to go. What did he give me? He actually solidified something that has been true in all of my novels. And somebody asked me, said, what is it about Johnny? And I realized that it's true of Byron de Prorock, and it's true of Luca, and it's true, which is these people who aren't powerful and aren't particularly educated, but have all the gifts that it takes to be successful
Mm-hmm.
and can't stay out of their own way.
Mm.
And Johnny has this thing, right? It's a very real handicap. Turning into a screaming rage monster is a very big handicap to achieving what you want to do. And yet, most of his challenges come from his self-talk.
Mm.
Right? He keeps telling himself he's not very smart, and yet he solves these things. He keeps saying that he's a loner and he's alone in the world, but he has these friends who are so amazing, who create a found family for him. And I think that's it. I have always believed myself to be undereducated. I always thought I was smart, but a screw up. Um, I don't have a college degree, even though I write business books that PhDs quote. Um, my self-talk is the most dangerous thing to me.
Mm.
I have said on multiple occasions, I would fire any manager who spoke to an employee the way I talk to myself. Right? I would be in HR on a regular basis because I don't treat myself very well. And that's a consistent thing. And I think Johnny is starting to find his feet.
Mm.
And he's starting to develop the confidence, and he's starting to feel like maybe he can do this. And after 16 books and these many years on the planet, I think I am too.
Mm. Nice. I love that. That's a hard lesson to learn. That is maybe the hardest lesson to learn as an artist because we are
Yeah.
so overcritical of everything we do, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So let's do this. We're going to do it's
Yes,
time for the Le Questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot, perfected by the awesome James Lipton on Inside the Actors Studio, and adopted
indeed.
here for our entertainment. So, Wayne, what is your favorite word to write?
My favorite word to write is the smart aleck answer would say the end. My favorite word to write, though, I like the word gumption.
Nice. I do too. That's a great
That's a
word.
great word and highly underused.
I agree. All right. What is your least favorite word to write?
My least favorite word to write is bitch.
All right.
And I use it where necessary.
Hmm.
If somebody is mad at somebody, that word tends to come out. But I always second guess it.
Hmm.
And I don't I turned very grumpy old man
Hmm.
that people calling people bitch and whatever that bothers my whatever sense of decorum I have left.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean I don't cuss like a sailor. It just means that particular word doesn't sit
Understood.
well.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Turns me on hearing people laugh.
Nice.
Hearing
Yeah,
people laugh.
I would imagine a comedian really that's their whole
I
gist.
remember the crowning moment. I had of all the years of playing clubs in towns you never heard of. I had two moments. One was when I did my evening at the Improv, which is available on Amazon Prime, by the way. Um, it's the only piece of me that exists on the internet from those days. But the second thing was I got a last minute call to open for the band Chicago
Ooh, cool.
at at an arena in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And when you hear 9,000 people laugh at the same time, you never
Yeah,
get over that.
yeah, that's cool. So then what turns you off?
People shouting at each other.
Hmm.
I literally cannot. My wife, I will never forgive my daughter for getting my wife hooked on the Real Housewives of New Jersey, and she binged watch all like 13 seasons. And hearing people screaming at each other
Yeah.
is just the most heart wrenching. I literally get physically uncomfortable. If
Wow.
she's watching that show, I cannot be in the room and I have to close my office door because it's like fingernails on my soul.
Hmm. So, well, here's everybody's favorite question, which is, what is your favorite curse word?
God damn. And what I love about it, it is so flexible, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, God damn it. Or, God damn. Depending on how you pronounce and spell it, it could mean almost anything.
Hmm.
And it's particularly transgressive because I was raised Baptist. And so, taking the name of the Lord was that would get me a mouthful of ivory soap.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you know, that's the word I will use that all day long in as many forms as possible.
What sound or noise do you love?
Children laughing, just the unabashed, just children losing their minds, giggling about something is the best sound in the world. And it's different than adults laughing. It's a totally
Mhm.
different experience.
Nice. What sound or noise do you dislike?
I could repeat myself and say people screaming at each other, but I
Mhm.
think in terms of noises, I just I can't take high pitched singing voices. This is a
Okay.
very weird thing, and I've been told that it is not. It's rare, but it's not uncommon. I cannot listen to Kelly Clarkson sing
Hmm.
because in every song that she sings, especially since I've been gone, there's a note that she hits
Mm.
that literally sends a shiver up my spine.
Wow.
And it's like listening to opera. I can listen to the baritones, but when the sopranos really get going, it is physically uncomfortable for me.
Wow.
Those high pitched noises, just
Huh. What character of yours would put their own face on a currency of their world?
Byron de Rock, absolutely.
What artistry would you love to try to do?
Which which one?
Artistry. A different
Oh,
what
you
different
mean other
artistry
than
have you?
writing?
Yes.
I am a graphic moron. I can't draw a straight line. I have no facility for being able to draw.
Hmm.
I have certainly I try to play music. I love music. I can read music. I can't play it. I have no musical ability, which kills me.
Mm.
But I would love to be able to draw and do the visual arts, and I just can't.
Mm. So I think you just answered the next question, which is which artistry would you never try?
Poetry.
Okay. All right.
Poetry. I do not possess that gift for metaphor.
Understood. It's an interesting one to possess for sure. So last question. If heaven exists, or whatever you believe in exists
Right.
beyond us, what would you like to hear God or the omnipotent being say when you arrive?
Good job, kid.
Nice. Well, Wayne, good job, kid. Very good job. Thank you so much
I
for
knew you had more power than you were giving yourself credit for.
Thank you so much for being here, doing this. This was an awesome, awesome conversation. I always love talking to you, and I love getting deeper into the Johnny Lycan universe and everything that you're doing. So, congratulations on finishing the series. Tell everybody where they can find it, and yeah, just tell everybody where they can find yourself as well, please.
Well, Johnny Lycan is a book. Uh, so wherever you buy books, you can only get the Kindle. You can only get the ebook on Kindle, but it's on Kindle Unlimited. I'm an urban fantasy author like everybody else on this freaking show. You know what? You know where you can get it, right?
Yeah,
But the good news is it's available around the world, which is fun. You can find me almost anywhere. WayneTurmel.com, shockingly enough, is my website. My Amazon author page, Wayne Turmel author, and I'm on Twitter or X or whatever it's called this week at W Turmel, and I love interacting with people. Do not be shy.
yeah.
Um, you know, leave a review, reach out. I remember last year I got an email from Byron de Proac's granddaughter,
Oh, nice.
who is now a woman in her 80s, who found the book. And
That's
it's
awesome.
like, man, as writers, we feel like we're shouting into the void sometimes.
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah. That is cool. That's awesome. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We will be back here in just a few minutes. So come back to Go Indie Now's homepage where you'll be able to jump in and see Mr. Bob Magoo joining me for the back-to-back 21 grams. For this episode, though, thank you so much to Wayne. Thank you to everybody in the chat. And remember, that's always time to Go Indie Now. And we'll see you in a few minutes.